You walk into a room and instinctively apologize for existing. You laugh too loud, sorry. You take a breath before answering, sorry. You decide not to go to an event you didn't even want to go to. Cue panic attack level over explanation. It's not just manners. It's not just being considerate. It's survival. Somewhere deep down, your nervous system has equated not explaining yourself with being unsafe. You were trained to believe that clarity buys love. That if you just explain yourself well enough, why you're tired, why you're not texting back, why you suddenly want to change careers at 40, then people will stay. They'll understand. They won't punish you. Spoiler, they will anyway. And not because you failed to explain, but because you stopped making them the center of the story. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." What he didn't mention is that the first step toward that privilege feels like walking backward into hell, wearing a sign that says, "Sorry I exist," and trying not to trip over your people-pleasing tendencies. It's not that you don't want to be understood. You do, but you've confused understanding with approval. And you've been holding the world's hand, whispering, "Here's why I'm okay. Please don't leave." Every boundary you've set has come with a TED Talk. Every no has needed a 3-point business plan and a PowerPoint titled, "Why I'm Still a Good Person, I Swear." Let's be blunt, explaining yourself constantly is emotional labor dressed up like empathy. It's insecurity in a tuxedo. And the kicker? The people you're explaining yourself to the most are often the ones who deserve your silence. You learned to do this young. Maybe it was a parent who gave love with strings attached, or a teacher who rewarded obedience but punished authenticity. You were rewarded for compliance, not clarity. So now, even when no one's asking, your brain assumes a firing squad and prepares the defense. Here's the dark joke of the day: you've basically been running customer service for your own soul. Hello, this is your subconscious. We value your confusion. Please stay on the line while we transfer you to someone who still gives a damn. But what happens when you hang up? When you stop answering every passive-aggressive text with a mini-novel that begins, "I totally understand where you're coming from," and ends with, "But I just need a little space, hope that's okay." Something strange begins. Your nervous system freaks out. You worry people will leave. Some actually do. And that's when the real self begins to stir. There's a moment, subtle, eerie, and surprisingly quiet, when you don't explain and nothing explodes. You don't respond to the bait. You don't justify your need for rest, or solitude, or change. And it feels like you've just committed a crime. But you haven't. You've just stopped being your own spokesperson. A practical tool: every time you feel the urge to explain, pause. Ask yourself, would I still feel the need to say this if I believed I was allowed to change, feel, or rest without permission? That question alone will save you thousands of hours of emotional tap dancing. Because what you're really asking when you over-explain is, do I still belong if I don't perform? And the answer, from the right people, will always be yes. The wrong ones? Well, they'll leave. Not because of your silence, but because they were only ever listening to themselves anyway. Here's where we go a little deeper. What if your niceness is actually a trauma response? What if all that polished, friendly, overly accommodating behavior is your inner child yelling, "Please don't be mad at me," dressed up in adult vocabulary? And here's the scholarly open-ended question: if you stop trying to control how people perceive you, what part of your identity would collapse? This is where individuation begins. Not in some monastery. Not in a perfectly curated morning routine. But in awkward silences. In unanswered texts. In choosing not to explain why you left early, or why you didn't reply to your cousin's Facebook rant. You're not here to be understood by everyone. You're here to stop abandoning yourself. Because every time you over-explain, you vote against your own sanity. You hand out a map to a place you're no longer visiting, hoping someone will chase you there. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to let them get lost. You stop explaining. Not because you don't care, but because you finally do, about yourself. And then, it happens. The shift is subtle at first. A text goes unanswered. You don't explain why you missed the birthday dinner. You don't defend your new job, your new belief system, or your sudden interest in pottery and isolation. You expect confusion. You prepare for confrontation. But what actually arrives is even worse: silence. Some people just vanish. See, you thought they needed your honesty. What they really needed was your obedience. They weren't sticking around for you. They were sticking around for the version of you that explained itself enough to be predictable, pliable, and painfully agreeable. Carl Jung called this persona the mask you wear to meet the world. It's not fake, necessarily, but it is curated, controlled, sanitized for other people's comfort. And when that mask slips, when you stop offering disclaimers for your boundaries, some people react like you've just robbed them at gunpoint. This is where you meet reality. Some relationships only survive when you're explainable. When you stop explaining, the people who stayed for control quietly back away. The ones who benefited from your guilt become suspicious. Are you okay? They ask, not because they care, but because your unpredictability threatens the version of reality where they feel in charge. Here's the kicker: silence reveals power structures faster than any confrontation ever could. Let's do a little experiment. Picture yourself saying this sentence to someone the next time you feel pressured to explain. That choice felt right to me. And then, stop. No elaboration. No emotional smoke signals. Just full stop. You'll either be met with respect or with an awkward silence thick enough to eat with a spoon. That reaction, it tells you everything. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But the inverse is true too. Everything that irritates others about us often points to the parts of ourselves we've dared to reclaim. So here's your practical tool. The next time someone reacts to your silence with suspicion, ask this: what did my absence of explanation take away from them? Control, predictability, an emotional crutch? That's not your burden to carry. That's their discomfort with your autonomy. Because autonomy, when you're used to being the explainer, feels like violence. But it's not violence. It's clarity. And clarity is rejection-proof. Think about it. The friend who just doesn't understand why you didn't come probably doesn't want to understand. They want access. They want the version of you that attends out of guilt, not joy. You breaking that loop doesn't make you cold, it makes you conscious. Let's get dark for a second. Your life has been a 24/7 unpaid role in other people's emotional sitcoms. You show up on cue, deliver lines not appropriately, laugh on command. Then one day, you improvise. You stop playing the part, and everyone panics. You've changed, they say, like it's a felony. Here's the dark humor for the day: the moment you stop explaining, you're no longer a person. You're now a glitch in their emotional matrix. They don't know how to read you anymore. And in that confusion, they reveal what the relationship was really built on: not love, not connection, but performance. Now for a real-life moment, a woman walks away from her narcissistic partner. She says nothing, doesn't defend, doesn't write the 5-paragraph essay, just leaves. And what happens? She's painted as emotionally unavailable, as cold. Because silence, to a manipulator, is not neutrality, it's betrayal. The truth? That silence was the first honest word she'd spoken in years. Here's the question you need to sit with: what relationships in your life only survive when you abandon your own silence? Because if a connection needs your self-betrayal to stay alive, it's not a connection. It's a hostage situation with good lighting. This is where we call in the concept of the inner villain. The part of you that finally stops performing, that says no, that ghosts, that blocks, that walks away without sending closure as a courtesy package. Jung would argue this is part of individuation, the process of integrating all parts of yourself, even the ones others demonize. And guess what? Sometimes your healing does look like someone else's villain origin story. Let it. Because the alternative is spiritual bankruptcy, explaining yourself into emotional extinction. It's okay to let people misunderstand you. You're not Wikipedia. You're not here to be constantly updated and cited. You're here to live a life that makes you make sense to you. Try this: the next time someone demands an explanation, give them none. Just witness what arises in you. The anxiety, the guilt, the twitching need to fix their discomfort. Don't fight it. Just notice it. Because that's not them. That's your conditioning. And once you see it, you can choose differently. You are not cold. You are not rude. You're just done offering emotional Yelp reviews for your choices. You don't owe anyone the story behind your no. Remember this the next time silence feels cruel. You are not being cruel. You are being sovereign. You finally meet yourself. Not the version you posted about on Instagram. Not the one that knows all the right words in therapy. Not the politely spiritual one that says, holding space while dying inside. No. The real you. The shadowy, petty, wounded, rageful, brilliant, exhausted you. The one who's been chained in the basement for years while the presentable you gave TED Talks on emotional intelligence. It's not glamorous. You don't arrive at this version of yourself with a halo and a cacao ceremony. You find them during a breakdown in the car at 2 a.m. while eating cold pizza and muttering, "I swear to God, if one more person asks me to be understanding, I'll throw myself into the sea." This is shadow work. Not some magical journaling session with a soy candle, but a grotesque, unfiltered reunion with the parts of yourself that were exiled for being too much, too angry, too needy, too real. Carl Jung famously said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." He wasn't being poetic. He was being literal. Your path to wholeness isn't a light beam, it's a tunnel. Let's call this what it is: emotional archaeology. You're digging through trauma layers, defense mechanisms, and generational coping strategies, and guess what? You're not unearthing treasure. You're unearthing monsters. Yours. The dark joke. They all kind of look like you. And they've been waiting, not to destroy you, but to be invited to dinner. Here's the self-deprecating part. You spent years thinking you were healing because you lit sage and cut people off. But the truth is, you were just disinfecting the surface. Meanwhile, your shadow self was in the basement doing push-ups, waiting for its chance to scream, "Can we please feel our actual feelings now?" A real scenario, you finally stand up for yourself at work. You don't over-explain, you don't people-please. You say no. You get called difficult. Instead of shrinking, you feel oddly proud. But then you go home and cry for 3 hours. Why? Because the part of you that needed to be liked just got kicked in the teeth by the part of you that needed to be free. That inner conflict, that's the beginning of integration. Not comfort, not peace, but truth. And truth will destabilize everything you've built on performance. Here's the tool: when you feel the urge to repress a reaction, anger, fear, even petty thoughts, pause. Ask, is this emotion unworthy or just unfamiliar? 9 times out of 10, it's not your emotion that's the problem. It's the judgment attached to it. Remember the inner villain we mentioned? Let's get closer. The inner villain isn't actually a villain. It's the one who says, "No, I won't be emotionally available to people who weaponize my empathy." It's the one who whispers, "Let them think you're selfish, it's better than living resentful." This isn't about becoming the worst version of yourself. It's about unshackling the parts that got labeled bad by people who only loved you conditionally. Here's your new mantra: just because they called it a flaw doesn't mean it wasn't a boundary in disguise. Jung believed that the psyche seeks wholeness, not perfection. So maybe the cracked, ugly, sarcastic version of you, the one who fantasizes about fake funerals to see who would cry, isn't a problem to fix. Maybe they are a necessary witness to your full humanity. Another real-world moment: you confront a manipulative parent. You don't scream. You don't justify. You just say, "This isn't working for me anymore." The silence that follows is deafening. You leave the room shaking. But later that night, as you sit in that silence, you notice you're not afraid. You're empty. Not numb. Not broken. Just unburdened. And that emptiness, that's what it feels like to no longer be performing. Here's the scholarly question: if you welcomed your anger, your grief, your pettiness, what might they teach you about your unmet needs? Shadow work isn't a productivity hack. It's a funeral for the false self. It's grieving the person you pretended to be for survival and finally sitting down with the parts you tried to exile. Yes, it's uncomfortable. You'll miss the high of approval. You'll miss the routine of self-betrayal. But what you get in return is intimacy with yourself. Because here's the twist: the real you isn't healed. The real you isn't polite. The real you feels everything, sometimes too much, and doesn't always say the right thing. But the real you is honest. And honesty is where transformation begins. So dig deeper. Go meet the you that you've never let out of the cage. Offer them a chair. Let them speak. They might not be pretty, but they'll tell the truth. So now you're raw, exposed, and slightly terrified. You've stopped explaining yourself. People have left. The ones who stayed are staring at you like you just shaved your head and joined a cult. You've met your shadow. You've discovered that your inner villain has incredible comedic timing. Now comes the real challenge: learning to walk through the world without slipping back into your old emotional debt collections. This is where most people confuse detachment with apathy. But emotional detachment isn't the art of feeling nothing. It's the skill of feeling everything and choosing not to react like a caffeinated raccoon every time someone disapproves of you. Carl Jung reminds us, even a happy life cannot be without a measure of darkness, and the word happy would lose its meaning if it were not balanced by sadness. Detachment is that balance. It's knowing you can hold sadness without being swallowed by it. You can hold judgment without crumbling under it. You can hold boundaries without needing applause for them. Let's make this painfully real. You tell your sibling you're not attending the family reunion. You offer no reason. Just, "I won't be there." They respond, "Wow, so cold." Here's what you don't do: write a 12-paragraph essay about your mental health, your burnout, and your need for solitude. Here's what you do instead: breathe. Let them label it. Let them be uncomfortable. And you go make a sandwich. You've earned it. This is the shift. You stop trying to control the narrative. You stop laundering your choices through the spin cycle of, "How will this make me look?" You become boundary literate. Not cold. Not distant. Literate. You've probably been accused of being distant lately. That's what happens when you no longer hand over your emotional limbs to every energy vampire who asks. But here's the dark humor: half the people calling you distant wouldn't even know what to do with your closeness. They just liked knowing they had access. You were a vending machine for comfort. And the moment you stop dispensing, suddenly you're selfish. But you're not. You're evolving. Detachment, in its healthiest form, is a decision to stop confusing empathy with obligation. It's the moment you realize that being available 24/7 is not a personality trait, it's a trauma pattern with Wi-Fi. Let's give you something practical. The next time someone accuses you of not being the same, say this: I'm not. That version of me was surviving, not living. And then, nothing. Let the silence sit there like an unpaid bill. This is called emotional fluency. You don't owe a reaction. You don't owe a counterpoint. You get to decide when and if you engage. Here's another scenario. You are in a relationship, romantic or otherwise, where your growth is now being framed as abandonment. You're not the same, they say. You don't care like you used to. And here's the gut punch realization: they didn't love you. They loved your willingness to shrink for them. Detachment teaches you to hold that pain without backpedaling. To say, yes, I've changed. I like me better now. And to sit in the ache that follows, knowing it's the price of wholeness. Let's pause for the open-ended question: what parts of yourself are you still diluting to maintain comfort for others? If you're honest, the answer might sting. You're still editing your joy so others don't feel insecure. You're still underplaying your clarity to avoid intimidating people who confuse confidence with arrogance. You're still apologizing for not wanting chaos anymore. You're not broken. You're healing out loud. And healing out loud makes people uncomfortable, especially the ones who benefited from your silence. Carl Jung talked about individuation as a painful, slow, deeply private process. He knew it wasn't about becoming detached from the world, but about becoming attached to yourself, to your truth, to your sovereignty. Let's anchor this with one last practical tool. Before any interaction, ask yourself, am I showing up out of love or out of guilt? If it's guilt, you don't go. You don't text. You don't explain. You pause, because your nervous system has spent years sprinting toward conflict avoidance. Now it gets to learn stillness. The kind that isn't empty, it's sovereign. Here's the weird part: you'll miss your old self. The one that tried so hard. The one who got high off approval and wore guilt like a weighted blanket. But slowly, that craving fades. You start to prefer your own company, your own rhythm. You discover there's peace in being misunderstood, because it means you're no longer packaging yourself for mass consumption. So the next time someone says, you've changed, just smile. They're right. And thank God. There comes a moment, quiet, anticlimactic, when you realize you don't have to announce your growth anymore. You just live it. There's no confetti, no cosmic drum roll, just a slow, strange ease creeping into your bones. You find yourself saying less, reacting less, offering fewer disclaimers like party favors. You're not trying to be understood anymore. You're simply not available for misinterpretation that demands your energy. It feels suspiciously peaceful, almost boring, but in the best way. Carl Jung once said, solitude is for me a fount of healing which makes my life worth living. That's not romanticism. That's realism. Because once you stop explaining, justifying, or narrating your every move, you get your energy back. And you realize how much of your life was spent doing customer support for your personality. You begin to see people differently. The friend who once needed an hour-long breakdown of why you're just not in the mood to hang out now seems exhausting. Not because they are bad, but because you're no longer seeking emotional clearance from them. You're no longer holding your own truth hostage until they approve the release. Here's a practical tool. The next time someone asks, why didn't you tell me? Whether about your new job, your breakup, or your spiritual awakening, you can say, because it felt like mine. And leave it there. This isn't cold. It's mature. You're allowed to live experiences that don't pass through a public relations filter first. You're allowed to live in mystery, even to the people who love you. And here's the great twist: the people who genuinely love you don't need the press release. They can sit beside your silence. They don't flinch when you pause, or step away, or disappear into yourself for a while. They trust your orbit, even if they don't fully understand your destination. That's love. That's spiritual adulthood. Here's your dark humor for the day. You used to beg people to understand your trauma. Now, your peace is so confusing they think you've joined a cult. No, Karen, I'm not in a cult. I just don't hate myself anymore. Funny how radical that seems. You don't need to scream your healing. You don't need to parade your detachment or post Instagram quotes about boundaries and the lunar cycle. You just need to be. Your existence is no longer a performance. It's a pulse. And that's what scares people. Because when you're no longer explaining yourself, you become unpredictable. You're not seeking permission, approval, or applause. You move through life like someone who knows. And people fear what they can't categorize. That's not your problem. Here's a question to sit with, maybe scribble down somewhere. If you never explained another decision in your life, who would still stand beside you? Write those names down. The list might be short. That's okay. It's probably more accurate now than it's ever been. Because this is what individuation looks like, Jung style. It's not always dramatic. It's subtle, steady. A reorientation toward self. Toward silence that doesn't ache. Toward solitude that feels like coming home. You're no longer narrating your healing like a public podcast. You're just doing the work, quietly, brutally, beautifully. and it changes everything. Suddenly, you're not explaining why you didn't reply. You just didn't. You're not outlining why your career path changed. It just did. You're not apologizing for being different. You just are. You become boring to the drum-hungry, invisible to the emotionally immature, mysterious to the people who once felt entitled to your every internal update. And in that stillness, the real you is born. No script, no captions, no performance, just presence.